Welcome back to Sunrise Daily. Well, let's continue focusing on the ceasefire agreement. We're joined now by Mr. Wahab Shitu, who is a lecturer in law and also a legal practitioner. Thank you for coming on this morning.
It's my pleasure to be here.
Well, let's look at this. I mean, legally speaking, the different perspectives to this. But let me even start by asking, this agreement, do we consider it, can we consider it as an agreement or contractual agreement or an invitation to treat?
Thank you very much. I think the first thing to appreciate is that ceasefire agreement usually do not have legal consequences in general terms. But what will make it legal? What will make it legal or semblance, what will give it semblance of legality? There are several factors. One, whether it is in the nature of a treaty obligation, in which case. Secondly, whether the parties conceive it in terms of a formal agreement, fully endorsed by the parties. Three, whether the ceasefire agreement contains clear-cut and precise obligations for the parties. And the first reason is whether a third party has a role to interpret and enforce the agreement. You can see these are variables that are critical. If it is a treaty, then you know that it must have legally binding consequences. A treaty can be bilateral, it can be multilateral. So if it is in the nature of an agreement, duly enforced, then it depends on whether you have a third-party role to interpret and enforce the agreement. Because usually it is, people coming for a ceasefire agreement, they have apprehensions. They are not normally, so what will determine the success, the durability of any ceasefire agreement also depends on a lot of factors. One, the military advantage of one of the parties. Before you have a ceasefire, there must have been advent of hostilities and a lot of fightings, and one party may have secured advantage, military advantage over the other. And the need for the peace process to ensue will have arisen. So military advantage is key to the durability of a ceasefire.
So what if there isn't any advantage?
Military advantage, I'm saying that one of the parties must have secured some kind of military advantage over the other. Secondly, the nature and political context of the conflict is also very critical. The nature. There are several variants of conflicts. It can be just ordinary conflict that you have. It can be in the nature of a crisis. That's also a conflict. It can be in the nature of a war, which is also conflict. And there can be, that war, has several variations. It can be guerrilla warfare or something. And then the advanced form of conflict is terrorism, which is the one we are dealing with now. And terrorism can be domestic, it can be international. And I think for what we have now, nobody will deny the fact that the crisis we have in our country today is not just local. It's not just domestic terrorism, we are dealing with international terrorism. So the nature and political context of the conflict is very critical. Also very, very critical is whether all the stakeholders, all the major stakeholders are involved in the peace deal. And that is why you seem to have problems right now. There are speculations that this peace deal may have been entered into with a faction of the Boko Haram, elements. And lastly, which is also very, very critical, is whether there's good faith
on both
and
sides
commitment of the parties to the peace process. Very, very, very critical.
How do you determine that part?
Well, if if they make themselves available, it depends on what they do immediately after the ceasefire. You understand it? You can see even impacts of Borno State ongoing hostilities. It's part of the ceasefire. But I mean, for me, that has not, dampened my morale about eventually achieving the kind of outcome we are talking about. Because when you look at the kind of insurgency that we're dealing with, we are dealing with hierarchy of command. We are dealing with, forces scattered all over. And so there is need to communicate effectively what has been agreed. Some people have also argued that we are dealing with several factions of insurgents. So it will take time for information to get down the line. You understand what I'm saying? So I think what has happened immediately after the announcement of this ceasefire is not something that should dampen you and I, because it's something that should be expected. One will imagine that sometimes it will take some time before ultimate peace is achieved, given the protracted nature of the conflict we are dealing with.
I think you're right in a way. Sorry to cut in there, because a lot of Nigerians were really amazed and surprised when that news broke that there was a meeting that led to a ceasefire in Chad. But again, looking at the international dimension this has taken, President Derby of Chad coming into all of this with our own representatives, what does that tell you? You're talking about good faith. Are we doing this because of some kind of trust that they have in maybe having to broker some kind of ceasefire deal with another country instead of doing it within the country?
You see, it's always a feature of ceasefire agreement for negotiations with respect to such agreements.
So it's more or less like
to take place
like a neutral ground.
To take place in a neutral ground, because the third party or the neutral place will offer avenues for the two parties to feel very safe to discuss. It will also give them opportunities to be able to, assure them that the discussions is without prejudice. And then the role of the third party is also very critical in the process, which is the role Chad is playing here, and which I think is a salutary role. Because, terrorism is not just, like I said, is an issue of international concern. Terrorism is global. There are certain matters that are of international concern. It's not just something so any threat to peace anywhere, it's a threat to peace everywhere. For instance, if a part of the world is facing hot violence, it should concern the entire world. That's why terrorism is seen as a crime against humanity. Corruption is seen as a crime against humanity. Genocide is seen as a crime against humanity. Piracy is seen as a crime against humanity. Human rights breaches are seen as, are issues of concern to the entire world.
So if they enter into this ceasefire agreement, will it absolve them of all of these crimes if they intended to charge them in the first instance?
No, you see, the world is always concerned about peace. Peace, the peace process. You see, crimes against humanity are, the fact that you have achieved peace does not mean you cannot be prosecuted subsequently if there are infractions. But you see, we should all be very happy as any prospect for peace. Because what has taken place, or what is taking place in our country today, is having a heavy toll, very heavy toll on lives, on property, and you and I live in fear. Everybody lives in fear. So whatever can be done to erase this fear ought to be welcome. That is why I believe that in fighting this war, of this insurgency, we should stop trading blames. We should not introduce the elements of politics into it. It's not a PDP or APC affair. Because you can only govern in an atmosphere of relative peace and security. So it is not the time to start saying, oh, it's a Jonathan problem. No, it's beyond Jonathan. It concerns Jonathan as much as it concerns Buhari, Atiku, and the Kwankwaso and the rest, and even other parties. Because the crisis we face today is the crisis of survival. If you want to put in place a regime of growth and development or good governance, you can only do that when the atmosphere is stable politically in terms of peace. So it concerns everybody. I want to see a situation where Nigerians will unite in the fight against terrorism the same way Nigerians united in defeating Ebola. And you can see the accolade that we are getting all over the place for this. Although some people, again, some people are trying to claim credit. But if you ask me, the credit is collective. There's no way you can deny Lagos State government of credit in this area. You can also not deny federal government of credit in this area because the Minister of Health also played the same. I also remember that the federal government donated funds. And I also know that there were volunteers. The Nigerian spirit, you can see it is a country that is immensely endowed in terms of resources, in terms of human resource capacity and all that. So that